In this episode, we will dive into 3 strange alien encounters. In 1978, a highly credible close encounter of the third kind would occur in Rimini, Italy. A 36-year-old Italian man named Antonio would come face to face with something unexplainable. Around 11:30 p.m., Antonio was watching TV, waiting for a boxing fight to come on. Before diving into the encounter, it's important to know some basics on Antonio's background. Antonio was very outspoken in his political views and as such had been the target of many threats. He worked as a security guard, and being very unpopular with many, he feared retaliation from his opponents. At night, it was foggy with a light drizzle, and just before midnight, Antonio's dog, which was a Marama sheepdog, began barking furiously at the window. Antonio knew his dog well, and that type of bark indicated it was a person, not another animal. Due to this, Antonio was convinced a thief or vandal was outside. Antonio decided to head to the window and look out. As he glanced out, he spotted a strange light around 100 feet away. The main center part was orange, but other parts were different colors, such as purple. Antonio knew pretty quickly what it was, or what he believed it was. He turned around and screamed to his relatives to come quickly. His wife, her mother, and his sister came out and witnessed the light for just a few moments, when it would then completely disappear. He began walking back to watch the TV, thinking the excitement was over, when once again he would hear his dog begin to bark angrily. This time, nervously, Antonio decided to walk outside and investigate what was happening. Outside, he stared toward the gate and shined his flashlight toward the darkness. Then, he heard noises in the tall grass and immediately shined his flashlight in the direction of the noise. There, about 20 feet away, Antonio would be stunned to see something. 2 gray aliens staring at him. Both were slim, with large jet black eyes, and had on a dark gray, tight-fitted suit. One of the humanoids was taller than the other one, being around 4.5 feet, while the other was around 3.5. They wore belts that had a distinctive, bright silver buckle. For a few seconds, the Greys stared at Antonio, and Antonio stared back. Both parties were very surprised, and it seemed like Antonio had caught the Greys off guard. Antonio then shouted to his family to come over. Once he turned back around, the Greys had disappeared into the tall grass. The next day, after a sleepless night, Antonio went out to the spot he had seen the Greys. He realized quickly that the Greys were actually around the same size. At the spot, he saw that one of them was standing on a small hill, while the other was not. In the area, Antonio would spot a 4-foot circular burn mark in the grass. It's generally believed this burn mark was from a light beam where the Greys were transported down toward the ground from the ship, and eventually they returned back up through it. We said Antonio had seen depictions of Greys before. He had seen a painting of these entities from the woman painter Modigliani. Also, on television, he had seen The Little Man of Roswell, which featured gray aliens. What can we make of Antonio's case? It seems somewhat credible, although like so many cases, it really comes down to eyewitness credibility. We've seen many report UFOs and other close encounters, but unfortunately, all too often, when these individuals are alone, it doesn't make for a compelling case. That said, we shouldn't dismiss Antonio's case, as he not only saw the beings, but also saw the lights too. A better question might be, what were these Greys doing? It's generally believed these entities were collecting samples, as they appeared to be caught off guard. It could be the case as well. They were abducting animals, as we have seen reports of animals on crafts. In the report, a positive aspect we need to point out is that Antonio would report feeling no fear when he saw the beings. On July 2nd, 1953, a strange alien encounter would happen in the municipality of Villas del Sals in Spain. Around 10 a.m. on his farm, 14-year-old Máximo Muñoz Hernáiz walked out of his home and toward the cattle. His chore that morning was simple: ensure that the livestock didn't wander off into the crops. Máximo sat down, and for the next 3 hours, he watched the cattle. Then around 1 p.m. local time, Máximo would suddenly hear a strange, faint, intermittent whistling sound. Initially, he didn't think much of it, as the sound was barely audible, but in a few minutes, Máximo decided to turn around and see what was producing the noise. As he turned around, he spotted what he believed to be a balloon. Each year, the local fair had balloons similar to what he saw, so his initial thoughts were that it must have been that. However, upon closer inspection, it seemed like this was something different. Máximo got up and started walking toward the object. It was around 3.5 feet in height, oval-shaped, and looked like a water container. It was a bright silver color, and where the sun reflected off it, it shined bright yellow. Máximo got closer and closer and finally was getting ready to reach out and grab it when he heard something. The top opened up. Máximo took a few steps back, and a stunned Máximo watched as 3 tiny humanoids jumped onto the ground. The beings were surely strange looking and didn't look like a typical alien. They were around 2 feet tall, had yellow faces with eyes that looked East Asian. They wore flat hats with visors in the front. Like we see in other cases, the beings, or chaps as Máximo called them, wore one-piece blue suits and also had some sort of emblem on the sleeve. Unfortunately, Máximo didn't make out exactly what the emblem was. The beings walked over and stood around him. The entity in the front of Máximo began trying to communicate with him. However, Máximo couldn't understand what he was saying. As the entity realized Máximo couldn't understand it, this seemed frustrated, and in a shocking turn of events, the entity gently slapped Máximo in the face. For the next few minutes, the beings stood around Máximo, and realizing they couldn't communicate with him, walked back toward the ship and got in. The craft then ascended and took off quickly into the sky. There was no smoke trail. After this, Máximo ran home and told his dad what happened. His father was skeptical, but could see Máximo was frightened, and the two headed out along with a police officer to where the incident had occurred. There, they found imprints of the craft and the beings. There were footprints and 4 holes about 5 centimeters deep and 2.5 centimeters across, each separated about 36 centimeters from each other. While the evidence wasn't overwhelming, it certainly lends support to Máximo's story. It's important to point out that around the time Máximo spotted the craft at the nearby Honrubia police post, several police officers would see a gray, white circular object traveling quickly to the east and leaving no smoke behind. The officers would state when they first spotted the object, it came from the direction of Villas del Sals, the municipality where Máximo's encounter occurred. What can we make of this case? In our opinion, the story seems pretty credible, although it did happen long ago, and it's not clear how thoroughly the event was investigated. However, Máximo's encounter provides support for the theory that mankind is being visited by more than one species of alien. In fact, many believe there are hundreds or possibly thousands that visit our planet. Interestingly, the 2-foot-tall beings do resemble another close encounter we covered on this channel. In 1971, in Finland, a logger would encounter tiny beings, which they described as around 2 feet tall and wearing a one-piece, green-covered suit. The beings had a green helmet with some sort of black visor obscuring its face. It didn't have any hands and had green boots as well. There are obviously differences between the two, but is it possible these two alien species are related? After the initial reports and investigation into Máximo's case, Máximo would never talk about the matter again. It's not clear why, but our guess is that, like so many others, he was ridiculed and wanted to move on with his life. On December 2nd, 1964, Wisconsin farmer William Bosak was returning from a farmers' co-op meeting when he would have an experience he would never forget. Around 10:30 p.m., Bosak was around a mile from his home when his headlights reflected off something strange up to the left. The night was cold and foggy, and Bosak was already driving slow due to the fog. As he slowed down even more, he would be stunned to see something he had never seen before. An oval-shaped silver craft hovered around 8 to 10 feet in height. There was a bullet-shaped window right in the middle, with something moving around. The craft was dark and only lit up by the headlights. For a moment's time, Bosak was able to see the creature through the window. The being resembled a humanoid, but clearly wasn't. It had hair sticking out from the side and ears that looked floppy, like a cow's. The entity had huge eyes, wore a brown, tight-fitted outfit, and stared directly at Bosak, appearing to be scared as well. Still going slow at the time, a stunned Bosak suddenly became frightened and put the pedal to the metal. However, something truly strange happened next. The inside of his car went fully dark, and there was some sort of odd sound that resembled tree branches hitting the car. It's not exactly clear what happened, but a few moments later, it stopped. Was Bosak and his vehicle taken? Did the UFO attempt to shut down his vehicle and fail? It's not really clear. Regardless, a confused and scared Bosak continued speeding away, and moments later arrived at his house, situated on a 400-acre dairy farm. He jumped out and quickly hurried into his home, running upstairs and trying to see if he could spot the craft. Unfortunately, he couldn't see it due to the fog, but it's possible too that it had already left. The next day, William Bosak would go to the spot and walk around the area looking for clues. No evidence was found though. Eventually, William Bosak's story would hit the press and be picked up by the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, or the APRO. The APRO would send out investigators and find William Bosak to be very credible and sincere. What can we make of this strange, albeit close encounter of the third kind? The being description was surely strange, and it's possible that even William's description wasn't entirely accurate. However, even though there was no other witnesses or corroborating evidence, it seems that William did see something in the sky that night, and it did not want to be seen.